Okay, so we're about 5 minutes ahead of schedule right now, which is always nice to be ahead of schedule. We'll probably end up making up that time somewhere, but I'm going to go ahead and just get started with our first panel. Our first panel is going to be the panel on ethics and lived tradition, going from 8:20 to 9:20. So we have about an hour here. And our first presentation, I would like to introduce Andrew Bridges. Andrew Bridges holds the Bhagwan Shantinath Lectureship at the California State University, Fullerton, where he teaches in both the Religious Studies Department and the Philosophy departments. Please welcome Dr. Andrew Bridges. And Andrew, you can go ahead and screen share.
Thank you very much, everyone. It is an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. All right, so let's go ahead and begin. Once again, thank you very much, everyone, for the invitation. It's an honor to be presenting to you all today. Thank you for the invitation. I'll begin by saying I am not an expert in yoga studies. My field of studies are epistemology and ethics. And my aim here today is to reflect on Jain Yoga as it relates to significant philosophical questions that Jainism provides answers to, and then to reflect on how Jain Yoga positively impacts the field of ethics and epistemology. So Jainism provides particular answers to what we might generally refer to as significant philosophical questions. Questions such as what ultimately exists? How can we be assured we have correct knowledge pertaining to the nature of existence? What is the purpose, goal, or meaning in life? Given the manifold complexity of reality, how do we understand what ethical and unethical behavior is? And finally, how do we cultivate virtue in ourselves and positively interact with society so that moral behavior is more collectively feasible and consistently achievable? Jain scholars have provided explanation on various meanings of yoga as well as descriptions of Jain yoga. Some of these descriptions I'll share in a moment, but by beginning with these questions, I want to emphasize a dimension of Jain yoga that helps facilitate profound understanding and appreciation to the answers and ideas Jainism provides for these aforementioned philosophical questions, as well as non-superficial appreciation of the dynamic ways the answers to these questions interrelate and cohere. So the first sort of explanation I found was from the Historical Dictionary of Jainism by Christy L. Wiley, who writes that in Jainism, yoga has several meanings. She then provides two complementary definitions or descriptions of yoga, as well as a technical meaning. So first is included meditation, mental concentration, and associated practices as described in Jain yoga texts such by authors like Haribhadra. Second is spiritual discipline associated with proper lay and mendicant conduct as described in Hemachandra's Yoga-śāstra. And third is, as a technical term in Jain karma theory, yoga means movement or vibration of the soul, jiva, and activity of body, speech, and mind. Similarly, addressing the multiple meanings of the term yoga in Jainism in the introduction to the volume Yoga in Jainism, Christopher Key Chappell writes, yoga in Jainism carries multiple levels of meaning. In the early Jaina tradition, the term yoga described the process in which karmas bind themselves to the soul, jiva. In the medieval period, yoga came to refer to spiritual practice. In this sense, the word remains in general usage today. Concerning the question of what ultimately exists and the meaning of life in relation to existence, Jainism believes that the world is empirically real, mind-independent, and infinitely complex. The Jain philosophical religious tradition is one of four dharmic traditions originating in India, the other three traditions being Hindu, Buddhist, and later during the modern period, the Sikh tradition. Generally speaking, one of the dimensions of the human condition that the Dharmic traditions address concerns the disparity between the way we desire the world to be and the way the world is. These traditions aim to reconcile this problem by correcting one's view, knowledge, and moral conduct to create congruency between one's expectations and one's experience. Elaborating on this point in his work, Asian Philosophies, John Kohler explains that the criteria for determining the quality of life are turn derived from the basic impetus for philosophy, the drive to eliminate suffering. The vision that makes possible a life without suffering is properly called true philosophy. Degrees of philosophic truth are determined according to their degrees of alleviation of suffering. Put in a positive way, views are true according to the extent that they improve the quality of life. In the Dharmic tradition, Jain philosophy's primary focus is to be liberated from the samsaric cycle of life, death, and rebirth, which continually occurs through the process of reincarnation. And Jainism does not posit a creator deity or any form of what one might refer to as divine intervention or help with the liberation process in that way. Relating to the reality of the world in the liberation process in Jainism, Christopher Key Chappell explains in the 4th chapter of the work Reconciling Yogas, entitled The Centrality on the Real, that Jainism's core philosophical philosophy, as articulated by Umasatnis in the Tatvara Sutra, asserts that the world is real, that the soul is real, and that the religious path involves gradual ascent through sequential stages, away from influences of karma and towards final liberation. In one sense, given Jainism's assertion of the reality of the world, reality of the soul, and reality of the liberation process from samsaric existence, the meaning and goal of life is liberation. Jain Yoga, in this respect, can be seen as answers and approaches to the questions of what actions, speech, and what thoughts bear habitual repetition in a mode of existence that does not itself bear habitual repetition in any ultimate sense. This dimension of the meaning of life, however, is only one for Jainism, because, as Chappell explains later in that same paragraph of the aforementioned quote, Jainism posits countless souls involved in the quest to disengage themselves from karma. Jainism does not hold a fundamental distinction between human life and other forms of life, such as animal, insect, or plant, asserting that each of these forms of life possesses a soul, jiva, and therefore each life form seeks to eliminate its suffering, which ultimately is realized in the process of liberation. Jainism, however, emphasizes that it is only the embodied form of the human being that the life form has the chance to be liberated. With this emphasis comes the complementary emphasis that human beings have existed as countless other life forms and will perhaps after death continue their existence as other forms of non-human life as they are continually reincarnated. This aspect of the ultimate nature of reality also has implications for the meaning of life in Jainism. In the chapter entitled Life Force and Jainism and Yoga by Chappell, found in the edited volume, The Meaning of Life in the World Religions, the emphasis on nonviolence and the interrelated nature of life forms is explained with reference to passages from the Acharanga Sutra, such as the following. To do harm to others is to do harm to oneself. You are the ones whom you intend to kill. You are the ones whom you intend to tyrannize over. We corrupt ourselves as soon as we intend to corrupt others. We kill ourselves as soon as we intend to kill others. In reference to this passage, Chappell explains that it suggests that human beings are not different from one another, nor are they fundamentally different from other living beings. We can observe that the interrelated emphasis, both on liberation and on nonviolence, or the vow of ahimsa, expresses a coherent aim that the path of liberation is interwoven with the path of nonviolence of any kind to any form of life. These dual emphases of the teleology of Jainism provide robust framework for understanding how ethics relates to the meaning of life in Jainism. Furthermore, the thoroughness of Jain emphasis on nonviolence to all forms of life in the context of liberation, as well as our contemporary planetary context, provides much insight into the significant philosophical questions, which deal primarily with concerns of ethics, virtue, and the good society. These questions are, as stated before, given the manifold complexity of reality, how do we understand what ethical and unethical behavior is? And how do we cultivate virtue in ourselves and positively interact with society so that moral behavior is collectively more feasible and consistently achievable? In our contemporary context, when we consider how moral values moral theories evaluate action and individuals, and how ethical theories aim to inform us of what moral consideration should ultimately be, various relevant criteria run to being. Now talking sort of globally, criteria such as moral obligations, ethical principles, virtues and vices, qualities of empathy and care, the considerations of intention and efficacy, collaborations and disagreements among perspectives ensue. Other related philosophical ideas pertain to the meaning of life and purpose, the nature of the human being, and how to incorporate ideas from sacred teachings that speak on matters of morality and ethics are also involved in the discussion as well. Disagreements over the ethics and morality can become so complex and insights so varied, many are led to assume moral subjectivism or even more relativism actually captures our ethical landscape. It is in this ethical situation that the thoroughness of the Jain concept of life and the principle of ahimsa applied to all forms of life continues to be the vanguard expression for nonviolence in the field of ethics. This can be understood in two distinct but interrelated ways. The first way is within the Jain philosophical and ethical system, in which ahimsa, in cooperation with the four other vows, facilitates spiritual development through reducing the effects of the accumulation of karma, reducing experiences of the intensity of the four passions while fostering the elimination of feelings of attachment and aversion so that equanimity is possible. In his chapter entitled Ethics and Mysticism in Jain Yoga Spirituality, Kamal Chand Sugani, not sure if that's the correct pronunciation of his last name, but Sugani elaborates on the vow of ahimsa, explaining the first Mahavata consists of the due observance, even in dreams, of the principle of non-injury to all living beings, mobile and immobile, gross and subtle, by avoiding threefold ways of acting, commanding, and consenting through the triple agency of the mind, body, and speech. In order that this vow may be properly observed, the monk or nun is required to be cautious regarding movement, speech, mental thought, handling of food, things, food, and drink. Within this context, the principle of ahimsa is lived out, and the feasibility of the scope of nonviolence to all forms of life is demonstrated, with the ultimate aim of liberation. The second distinct but related way is the principle of ahimsa can be understood as a leading expression of nonviolence in the field of ethics is through the consideration of the question, how can we positively interact with society so that moral behavior is collectively more feasible and consistently achievable? Here, the principle of ahimsa might be seen as a way of reducing harm to all life forms in the larger societal and planetary context. The focus here would not necessarily be on how the direct carelessness of a particular action had direct harmful effects on another life form, for example, accidentally stepping on another life form like an insect while walking, but rather the focus would be on what actions can be taken to reduce harm to all forms of life, given our growing awareness of the interconnectedness we as all life forms are. Not in the reincarnated sense, but in the sort of in the present sense, in the immediate sense. And when pondering how the principle of ahimsa might be applied in this vast planetary context, in which various ethical theories also provide suggestion for moral obligation and praiseworthy action, we might turn to the one significant remaining question mentioned at the beginning of the paper, which has been addressed yet. This is the question, how can we be assured we have correct knowledge pertaining to the nature of existence? This question, I find, is slightly different from the merit and acknowledgement of the practical value that would be placed on an explanation of reality and application of its ethical system if it was to drastically reduce suffering and improve life, which Jain principles, it seems, have great potential to do, particularly if such practices became more pervasive and the ideas, for example, in the Jain Declaration of Nature and the Jain Declaration on Climate Change were transformed into larger global policies. This question is also somewhat different from the praise and appreciation for Jain Yoga that essentially provides an individual with the spiritual knowledge, guidance, and techniques which allows for greater expressions of nonviolence. With respect to how one can be assured their knowledge pertains to the nature of reality is correct, Jainism asserts a few fascinating claims. The first fascinating claim is that an omniscient viewpoint exists. The second claim is that knowledge from that omniscient viewpoint has been expressed by Mahavir, and aspects of this knowledge have been preserved in Jain Dharma, such that all the significant philosophical questions posed at the beginning of this paper could be given particular answers to. The third fascinating claim is that all non-omniscient viewpoints or points of view are ultimately incomplete. Jainism also describes 14 spiritual stages of development in which one is capable of eventually progressing from an incomplete perspective to a complete perspective of omniscience. In this context, Jain Yoga can be understood as providing a path from a partial perspective in which belief in the knowledge about the nature of reality cannot immediately be experienced in totality to an omniscient form of knowing. Forms of gradual spiritual progress and their experiential fruits or new experiences when approached from fields of cultural and phenomenological anthropology can be put into other interesting frameworks, frameworks such as history becoming nature, following the insights of Pierre Bourdieu's and his understanding of habitus. Also other frameworks such as spiritual kindling, following the insights of T.M. Luhrmann. That the main ontological difference between these approaches to spiritual development and their phenomenological experiences is that Jainism has an ontology of plurality expressed in Anekantavada, whereas cultural and phenomenological anthropology does not necessarily assert any unified metaphysical system. Therefore, given these ontological differences in orientation, it remains to be seen if Jain Yoga will attempt to provide any larger coherent context to appreciate the various spiritual insights and practices cultural and phenomenological anthropology continue to elaborate on in the context of world religions and world spiritualities. So thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Andrew Bridges, that was really a fantastic presentation. If you could stop screen share, that would be great.
Of course, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you made some really fascinating points there. It's always nice to hear reflections from the perspective of philosophy on the Jain tradition. And you brought up some really interesting philosophical points of perspectives and questions there. I think we'll have time to answer in the question section. So I just wanted to mention, everybody, there is a question and answer function on the webinar. You're welcome to type any questions that you have. I will record those questions. If you're around at the question and answer time, you can ask them yourself. But if not, I'll probably end up reading them. So I'll record those. And then, of course, our question and answer section will be happening at 11:10 to 11:40 for this panel.